right, so we're going to start off with some intros and then get into the questions that I have for our panelists. And if you would please hold your questions to the end. We're going to try to have like maybe 10 minutes towards the end, so no shouting out. Okay, just hold on to your burning questions. We'll get to them afterwards. So let's get started. Bryan, would you go ahead and introduce yourself, and we'll work our way this way?
Oh, okay. Well,
Thank you.
I am Bryan Thomas Schmidt. I'm the author and editor of 22 anthologies. 7 of the anthologies were #1. I have my latest novel, Shortcut, which is just out on audio. I've co-edited a lot of books with this gentleman, 2 over here. Edited books for this man on his WordFire Press, and was the first editor on Andy Weir's The Martian. That's the one everybody talks about. I have a company called Top Shelf Editing, and I earn about 90% of my income is from editing, but I also have 7 novels out.
And editing is a collaborative process, so we tie that into it. I'm Kevin J. Anderson. I've published 180-ish books, and I tried to count something like 40 to 50 of them are with another author. No, it's more than that. So I'm good at playing well with others, and I did 32 books with my wife, Rebecca Mesta, in collaboration, and we're still married. So we figured out the techniques, and we wrote a book called Writing as a Team Sport about successful ways to collaborate.
I'm Jonathan Maberry. I'm a multi-genre author, also editor of anthologies, editor of Weird Tales magazine, and movie TV EP.
My name is Marie Whittaker. I am a cross-genre author, and I also write children's books on anti-bullying. I think I have 10 books out. I'm also the director of Superstars Writing Seminars, and I'm an associate publisher at WordFire Press. Okay, so first question I have is, can you guys name the types of collaborations that you've worked on? So different types of collaborations. Kevin, do you want to start that one?
Yeah.
Thanks.
So when we put this book together, I actually talked to other collaborative teams and found different ways that they're doing. And there are a couple of things that when Brian Herbert and I write Dune books together, it's a full-on collaboration that we get together, we brainstorm 4 days, we outline the whole book, we break it up into 90 or 100 chapters, and we each write half of them. We pick which ones we want to write, and then we each write half of them, and then we edit each other's stuff. So that is a full-on 50-50 collaboration. Other ones that are done is there might be one, like a Jedi Master author and a Padawan author, and like Anne McCaffrey did that with a whole lot of other authors, that Anne will write the outline and brainstorm with the author, and the author will then write the first draft of the book, and then Anne will give it like a final polish. There are dangerous ways to do it, which sort of like the round robin, where you have no plan whatsoever. One guy writes the first chapter, and then the partner writes the second chapter, and then the first one writes the third chapter, and I was told I could say this, that's the clusterfuck method of collaborating. And there are, in fact, I've done this sometimes. I love writing the first draft. I love it. That's the fun part, writing the story. Editing that, I hate it. But if you find a collaborator who doesn't like writing the first draft but loves to be editing and polishing, then we call it first and final. Like, I would write the first draft, collaborator finishes it up. So those are, completely different ways of collaborating, and people have great results with it.
Yeah, I've done a lot of the parallel collaboration where you're doing 2 different storylines and then you have to mesh them all together at the end. Layered collaboration, I probably do that a little more often, where somebody will write that first draft, and it's funny, much as I love writing first drafts of my own book, in collaboration, I prefer the other person to write the first draft. I go in, because I love revision, and go in and expand. Like, I have a book out, The Sleepers War.
We should work together.
We should. I have a book out now called Sleepers War, where I worked with Weston Oakes. He did a 70,000 word first draft. I bumped it up to 170,000. And, it was back and forth once the second draft was done. But that's an amicable collaboration. I've also done stuff where, projects where, like when I was a writer on Black Panther comic for Marvel, the writer who was the official writer on it was doing 2 of the 3 storylines in his last run, and I did the other storyline, but kind of as a ghostwriter, because all I got was and thanks to Jonathan Maberry. But it set up my run on the book, you know, as a full writer. So there are a lot of different ways to do it, and each one comes with its own fun moments and its own challenges.
I can mention a couple more. Now, I've done collaborations where we basically had a writing room, and my job was to bring everything together and then make sure everything transitions well and connects, and on writing plays and things like that, where we had basically a youth camp of kids. That's a unique thing. I've done it some with writers too, but that's the trick. The other collaborations I do are as editor on anthologies, because I do a lot of anthologies. Now, Jonathan and I have actually collaborated a lot on editing anthologies, and I think the trick is that we not only do we like and respect each other, but we can split up the work. We can say, okay, you want to handle this? Okay, I'll handle this. And if I see something that needs to be done, I'll just pick up the slack if he's busy, or vice versa, and we get it done. So a lot of it is finding people that you like to work with too, that I think is a trick, you know.
There's one other thing that we haven't really mentioned, that you might want to get a collaborator who is important because of what he or she knows.
Yes.
Like you might have an expert in something, the expert astrophysics, I'm blanking on his name, Neil deGrasse Tyson. So if Neil deGrasse Tyson wants to write a hard science fiction novel with me, I'm there. I'll write the novel. He'll just make sure all the science is cool and funky and everything. I don't really want him writing chapters because he's not a fiction writer. Or Bill Clinton and James Patterson wrote a political thriller together. Bill Clinton brings Bill Clinton to it. James Patterson knows how to do the story. I don't imagine that Bill Clinton wrote a bunch of chapters. I don't know. But that's not why he's there. He was former president of the U.S., so you're writing I think it was the President Got Kidnapped novel. So you bring in somebody they're not the co-writer, but they've got the clout to make this book happen. So if anybody of you know Bill Clinton, maybe he didn't like working with James Patterson. So.
Well, they also, I mean, with Shortcut, I had a science advisor that I worked very closely with, and he wasn't a writer, but I'd write the scene based on scientific papers that he actually did for me, and then he would fix it. You know, oh, you explained this incorrectly, you got to do this. So he didn't want his name on the front of the book, but he contributed a great deal to my being able to do real hard science and hard math in the book and make it more real. So, I mean, that's definitely a part of the process. And yeah, Nancy Kress did a book with somebody recently where she collaborated with the guy, and he was an expert on science, and they have the novel out. I don't remember the name of it off the top of my head, but it's one of her recent novels.
Well, I think Nancy Kress is an expert in science in her own right.
She is.
So
she is.
That was, yeah.
But that was, from my understanding, when I saw her explain it, that was part of why they partnered on the concept.
Yeah. So as far as partners go, I think my all-time favorite partner writing a novel was a friend of mine who deployed over to Afghanistan on a contract. And so he was doing a security contract over there, and I had just lost my brother, and my brother was a Marine. And so we had like all of these things to talk about and to share. And as we started out writing a paragraph and emailing it to one another. And it went really, really well at first. And then it just really became this novel where these characters, it became really therapeutic. Okay, so we wrote that back and forth, and it ended up being like 150,000 words. And it was a really great story, but it was like pretty emotionally loaded, as you can imagine. And when it came time to start editing and stuff, neither one of us wanted to touch it. We still have not done anything with it. So that's one really great experience that I had collaborating that really hasn't, come to fruition yet. And then the other ones are like short stories and novelettes and novellas and stuff. When I got to write a novella with Jonathan, that was one of my favorite times. Yeah, we had a lot of fun with that one. Okay, so let's talk about do's and don'ts when you're collaborating with your partner? What is one, yeah.
Okay, I'll tell you a big one, all right? You need to decide who is going to allowed to do the final production overrule if there's going to be that need. When I was working with Jonathan, for example, I worked with him on several Joe Ledger or Rotten Ruin things. I was always like, okay, I'm just going to defer to Jonathan. Well, it's his universe, that kind of thing. When you're working with somebody who either has the higher stature as an author or you're working in their universe, I think that's the best approach. But you definitely need to figure out kind of what the hierarchy is if there needs to be one.
Yeah.
Well, and one of the other things is if you're picking a collaborative partner, make sure that you have like the same work ethic and the same style of writing. And by style of writing, I mean do not put a rigorous plotter with a vehement pantser together. That is not going to work as a collaboration. I had Kim Stanley Robinson, a science fiction author, very well known. We were having dinner with him, and he said, he was asking me how I could survive collaborations, because he did one where they had spent all this time and he had outlined the book and he wrote the first chapter and gave it to the collaborator, who then just wrote something entirely different. And he said, but it's not following the outline. Yeah, but I thought it was so much better. And I went, so that one didn't work at all. Another one that I did with David Brin, science fiction author. I write like a maniac. I write all the time. I'll finish a story in a day or two. He wanted to work with me so that he could see what my techniques were. So we decided to do a short story together. We outlined it like 5 scenes. This happens, this happens. And so I wrote the first scene in a day, sent it off to him. 4 weeks later, I get a paragraph back. And I looked at it and went, well, okay. And then I wrote the next scene and sent it off to him. Another month goes by, and then he sends it back. And I went, well, screw this. And I just finished it. And he wrote back and he said, you know, I've learned a lot about this because I wanted to see how you write so fast. And I now know that it's because you write all the time. I went, well, if you're writing 1 paragraph a month, that's not a very good way of getting things done. But that did not work. Brian Herbert and I are both maniacs. He writes as fast as I do. And when we're working, it's almost a testosterone contest of who can write faster and who can get it done faster. If you have 2 really slow writers, that works. But if you have 1 slow, 1 fast, it's not a good one.
Among the do's and don'ts that I try to get nailed down before we go into it is there has to be an agreement of rights. There has to be an agreement of profit sharing and all that. The business stuff has to be taken care of. I don't trust the amicability of friends without an agreement in place. I've been there, done that, don't like it. So that's one thing that really comes into play. Another is you have to really be familiar with the other person's writing. We all have writer friends whose books we don't read. They may be out of our genre or whatever, but if you're going to write in collaboration, it's really important to not only read their material but study their style, because if it's a collaboration, you want the final product to be a smooth amalgam of both voices. Hopefully producing a third voice. That is a combination of the two. But if you don't know the other person's style, that's kind of hard to shoot toward. I've done some collaborations with people whose styles are so wildly different from mine that the revision process took 4 times longer than it needed to. And I've worked with writers who are close enough to my style that even listening to it on audio or rereading it, I can't remember whose writing is whose. But if you're not familiar with the other person's writing and their work ethic and everything else, you're not going to be able to enter into that collaboration with any degree of confidence.
So I have a major do. Do set expectations. It's like Jonathan was just saying, having some sort of an agreement in place, like who's going to do which part, who's going to write how much, stuff like that before you even get started on it, because you don't want to be disappointed like Kevin was with somebody turning in a paragraph when he's just been cranking out the work. So, okay, next question. What did you use?
Are we going to talk more about the agreements in the division? Because that's a whole
We do. We have some conflict resolution coming up. What did you use to do the actual writing? Like, did you email it back and forth? Did you have a Google Doc? what is your favorite way of getting this done?
I'll tackle that one. I hate Google Docs. I don't know why, I just have a thing against them.
I hate them too.
I'm a big
We all
fan
hate
of
'em.
sending emails back and forth, sending a Word doc back and forth. And, when we're doing it, that's something also to agree on, because I've started collaborations where someone just insists on using Google Docs despite the fact that I don't want to. And, those are things.
Danger sign right there.
Yeah, you have to get those things sorted out at the beginning. What was the other part of the question?
Like, what is your favorite way
Oh,
of getting
collaborating,
the
yeah.
writing done?
Yeah, favorite way is definitely picking who's going to, if it depends on the type of thing. If it's a parallel thing where you have two storylines that mesh, I did one with Larry Correa where, we both plotted it out together. He did his storyline, I did my storyline, and then when our storylines collided, that's when we started sending stuff back and forth. But we were able to do the two storylines kind of at our own speed, but with a set due date. For the layered stuff, there's almost always a due date. I need it by this time. For some of us are really busy writers, or really busy in different parts of the publishing world. I don't have time to wait for somebody's convenience. This is when I need that draft. I'll get my draft to you, and we go back and forth. There has to be a good schedule to it. I like that schedule because it not only keeps us on track, it keeps us from kind of wandering off the point of the story. The story stays fresher if we're working together toward a deadline.
Another thing that's so important with this is communication, all right? If you're working with somebody, you need to stay in touch. You don't just like go off and write your thing and they don't hear from you from weeks at a time while they're working on it, especially when you're on a deadline. Don't make them chase you down. Let them know, hey, I'm working on it. Should have this scene by Thursday or whatever. Keep in touch, because that can be a great source of tension and frustration if you're like, okay, is this person even doing this right now? I mean, it's really important to talk and communicate. It's not like you're going to talk through every bit of what you're writing. It's just a matter of letting people know, hey, I'm working on it, that kind of thing.
And like when Brian Herbert and I are doing a Dune novel, we have it all outlined so that he knows his chapters and I know mine, and they're very frequently separate storylines. So he'll do this one and I'll do that one. But we each write our own in Microsoft Word, and then when we're done, and it's usually me, he sends me all of his chapters, and I just stitch them all together into one big Word document. And our agreement is, I'll go through first. I do all the sanding and trying to make everything fit together. And then when I've gone through it once, it goes over to Bryan, and he goes through it, and then he sends it back to me, and then I go through it and send it back to him. But here's the really important technique that I've discovered all the way through. If you're collaborating, you need to trust your partner. I wouldn't ask somebody to collaborate with me if I didn't intrinsically trust that they knew how to write. And so we have this agreement, and this is one of the most important parts of our agreement. As I get this Microsoft Word, there is no track changes. I do whatever I want, and then I give it to him. He does whatever he wants, and I trust him. And if there's something, I decided to kill this character off, well, then it's a phone conversation. But if you have track changes on, or back in the old school days when you actually had a manuscript and you marked it all up, your collaborator sees that as you being the teacher correcting his paper. Anytime you rewrite a sentence, then your partner's going to go, well, what was wrong with that sentence? And who are you to think you can correct my sentence? Whether or not they articulate it, it's still this nagging thing in the back of, he just rewrote my sentence. Where does he get off? Why is he doing all that? So my rewriting of Bryan's is entirely invisible to him, and vice versa. But what will happen is, as it goes along, I'll go through, and any sentence that just doesn't sound like me, I'll fix it so that it reads smoothly. And when he goes through any sentence that doesn't sound like him, he'll fix it. So by the time we're done, this thing is really smooth and nobody can tell who wrote what.
That's like the ultimate goal, right? And
Right.
just being like told from one narrator.
I was gonna say, the other risk of using track changes is you get the whole, that was my favorite line, why'd you kill my favorite line thing? If the changes are blind and they don't notice it, it really wasn't that important, so why draw attention to it, you know?
So my absolute favorite way of collaborating is live docs in one way or another, like so that you can look up. It's really cool to like if you're working on a certain section of a book and somebody else is working on a different section, you can go up and you can actually watch them write live. I don't know.
That's
I kinda
creepy.
Like that. I love it.
No.
I couldn't do that. No.
Yeah, I suggested we do that.
I won't do it on fiction.
Because my inability to spell and do grammar would show.
Okay, so moving on to a kind of difficult topic, but it's something that we all have to think about before we start collaborating. How do you check your ego at the door when you begin a collaboration?
Well, first of all, you shouldn't collaborate with somebody you don't respect. I mean, that's the number one thing. Or like. I mean, seriously. Don't be opportunistic. Oh, this guy's an asshole, but he sells a lot of books, so I'll collaborate with him. No, because that disrespect will show through. You really need to like and be a fan of their work and respect what they do. I think that's the number one thing, because it's hard to collaborate. It's hard to write by yourself, let alone to work with somebody else. You've got to have that trust, and that won't be there if you don't have that respect.
Well, and again, the Dune novels are a really good example. Look, Brian Herbert and I have written, I think we calculated 4 million words together. And in all of that time, which is like 26 years, all of that time we got into one fight about where to go to lunch. But that was actually about writing. But really, in all of that, we talked things out, and we brainstormed it in the first place. And whenever something, like when you're writing, you might go, hey, this is better than the way we plotted it. Well, then I'll call up Bryan and say, how about we do this? And we'll talk it through. And we respect each other and we work together. But the most important thing is this isn't a Kevin book or a Bryan book. This is a Dune book. And the ultimate goal of the project is the book we produce. And so what's best for the book is how we go into it. And you really, I mean, when you're collaborating with somebody, you're letting them into your most intimate writing, that they're rummaging around in your underwear drawer and doing everything, that they see your drafts, they see your clunky sentences, they do everything. You have to be able to just look at the end product as the goal of the collaboration.
Yeah, checking ego at the door thing is really critical. People start out these projects with good intentions, but emotions get in the way, especially the please don't mess with my words part of it. And I try to have conversations at the beginning of any collaboration to ask, what is your reaction going to be, or are you going to be offended if I change something? Because I know that if somebody changes something of mine, I've learned, and largely from the comic book world, learned to check my ego at the door right away, because like comics are collaborations. The editor is involved on every step of the comic book process. The letterer actually has a lot to say about the writing, because he needs to fit the word balloons in without blocking out all.
Put that many words
Yeah,
in the balloon.
I got the same letter Joe Hill got from the same artist, letterer saying, at some point, would you like the readers to see the art? And you can't get offended about that. You can't get precious about your own stuff. You can't get you just can't get into an argument. So having conversations at the beginning of how do we resolve things, talk that through usually works pretty well. But also, somebody does have to have the veto power. I don't get involved in any collaboration where I don't have veto power, for one reason. I've only collaborated with people, except with Larry Correia, whose career has been as successful as mine. I've only collaborated with people who may not have published as many pieces as I have, but I'm working with them because they're good writers. So, especially if I'm working on one of my own licenses, like V-Wars or, Joe Ledger or something else where it's my world and somebody's writing in it, I need that veto power. But I find that if I have that conversation up front, I've almost never had to use the veto power. Only once, and it was with somebody who turned out not to be able to check his ego at the door. And that became the only project we ever did together. And it's a project that I almost never talk about, because even though I like the final product, I don't want to have to talk about that collaboration. I'm certainly not going to name names. But you have to be able to work and play well together, because the end result is something that the reading public is going to see and enjoy. You'll both get the praise if they enjoy it. And if it comes out clunky, then it's going to come back as you guys just don't know how to play well together, and you don't know how to work well together, and that's a sign of poor business form.
I can say I've co-written at least 1 or 2 stories with him, and I've edited several anthologies. And he's never had to exercise veto power. We've never discussed it beyond the first time we ever talked about it when we first collaborated. We've never talked about it. So, that's a good thing. That's why we work well together.
Yeah. So I did get my feelings hurt one time, and it wasn't even. I try not to think it was about ego. But this part of this book that I wrote was really, really good. And so I really liked this one part, right? And when it went back to my collaborator, the other author, they did not like the part as much as I did. And so I learned early on, to just let that go. The book is still a great book and everything, but that was kind of hard for me because I was kind of attached to this one particular part. So I think, my lesson there was, not letting ego get in the way and stuff, was just learning to let it slide, let certain bits of it go. Don't be in love with any one part.
Can I just throw one more thing about the collaborations? Another collaboration we hadn't talked about is collaborations with a license holder. So I'm doing short stories tied to video games. And like they ask me for an outline, I give them an outline, they love the outline, but then it has to go up the scale to all the different executives who have some creative control or feel they need to justify their jobs by giving a note. And like this one project I'm working on, I have now had 3 complete sets of edit notes saying that they want substantial changes, even though the changes that were in the latest version are based on their own notes. So they're contradicting themselves. And there's part of me that wants to, go all, serial killer with a hatchet. But that's not business. It's their product. They're paying me to work in their product, so I have to completely put my ego on the shelf and say, okay, well, this is, if you guys want me to do another round of this and you're paying me enough for it, I will do it and not complain. Because in situations like that, in that kind of a corporate collaboration, if you become the whiny voice, that may be the last gig you ever get, too.
I'll say, I had one really difficult collaborative experience, and it was with somebody who was more of an equal. All right, if I'm going to work with Kevin or I'm going to work with Jonathan, I'm automatically going to assume, okay, I'm the second fiddle here. They're going to get the final veto power because of where they are in the industry and what they've got. But this guy came in, and we were pretty much on the same level. I probably had more books than him. He had some other things going on that, but he came in and he was basically like, yeah, I get final say on everything. Not even a discussion. And that was a problem. So, I mean, one of the things, if you're going to work, especially if you're going to work with people who you're kind of on the same level, you really need to be able to figure out, okay, how are we going to work together on this? And because in the end, it can feel soul-crushing to have somebody who thinks they're better than you telling you you're not doing it right when you're trying to collaborate on something. So you've got to kind of choose that very carefully, because when you collaborate, again, the mutual respect has to be there.
Right. And we've kind of hinted around about it, just almost getting there with quite a few of our comments, but how do you guys resolve conflict when it does come up? And don't tell me that it doesn't come up, because I know it comes up. So do you set expectations early and then refer to a contract, or do you talk it out? Do you go to lunch?
I just have a quick answer to that one, then I'll pass it along. Talking it out is really key. I'm going back to Larry Correa as an example. Now, Larry and I could not be more further apart in politics. We have completely different political views, but we checked that at the door. And we decided that since our characters, to one degree or another, represent our political biases, instead of trying to do a layered collaboration, that's why we chose to do the parallel thing, where he followed his character with that character's point of view kind of baked in, and I did mine. And toward the end, we had to have some conversations before we did that last part, because we didn't want either political bias to be the bias of the story. We allowed it to be the bias of the characters. That kind of conversational approach allows you to work on something even if there are things you fundamentally disagree with, and it's one of the reasons Larry and I have stayed really good friends over all these years. We can check not only our egos at the door, We can check our politics, our religion, everything else at the door, because they may inform a specific character's experience. They should not inform the structure and the result of the book itself, or the story itself.
Well, I mean, just to reiterate, I always just talk it through, and I've never had anything that didn't work just talking it through, because my partners and I have a very good rapport. But this is something that I really want to bring up because it's relevant to what a lot of you guys might be doing, is decide the rules of the game when you're starting. Don't just assume that you understand what your partnership is going to be like and the other person has the same understanding. And I've got a full detailed example in here, but I'll kind of summarize it. So say this fits anybody here at 20Books. You and another peer at about the same level of indie success, you're both writers, you're prolific. You decide you're going to do a series together of vampires and dragons. And you plot it, hey, this is a cool idea that you can do, a continuing series, and it's going to be great. So you work with your partner and you work well. Your first book comes out, your second book comes out, your third book comes out, and then you suddenly get a movie gig and something takes off on a different book, and you get hired on a TV show or something. And all of a sudden, you don't want to do a Vampires and Dragons book every 2 months. But your partner doesn't have anything else going for them, so they want to keep going on Dragons and Vampires. But you co-created this series. You want out. You don't want to do anymore, or you want to do one every other, one a year, and the series needs one every 3 months. So what does your partner do? Do they just take it over and keep all the money from subsequent books because it was built on the first books? How do you divide that up? Do both names go on the cover because your two names were always on the cover? What happens when somebody wants out? What happens if somebody is in a charity run in Las Vegas and trips and shatters his shoulder and can't do any more writing for a while? That's a friend of ours. What happens if you die or the partner dies? Do the heirs get it? All kinds of. An agreement is not supposed to be a friendship document. It's a worst case scenario document. And always, this is what I had the hardest trouble. We always plan for these disasters, but you also got to plan for success. What if the thing turns into the next Twilight? It takes off. Millions of people are reading it. Success is often what kills the most friendships. Decide, just lay out the ground rules. And again, in this one, we had a lawyer drop a collaborator contract that you can take out of this book. I give permission. Here's the contract. But it deals with things that you don't want to think about. What happens if your partner gets hit by a car and is in a coma? Or you have a book that's half finished and you need to finish it because the partner's incapacitated. And I've always had, it's always 50-50 between me and my partner. But what happens if my partner didn't write the book because he got COVID, was in the hospital? You just define how that goes, and it's hard. This is crap you don't want to deal with. But it's a whole lot worse to deal with it when it comes up than to deal with it now when you're all friends.
Well, Bryan, I know you've had to deal with a little bit. What is your favorite technique to get things done?
Deal with, you mean conflict? Well, I was just going to say, what I was going to say was, I've got 2 or 3 collaborations that never got completed because we couldn't talk it out. We couldn't get it resolved. You have to let it go. It's different if you have a contract. If you have a contract for something, you have to deliver that. You've got to find a way to work through that. In this case, we were writing something on spec. But my favorite way to work it out is just, you really have to be able to just, if like one of my partners, they just wanted to go back and forth. I'm like, we need to get on the phone. We need to have an emotional conversation because you're misreading what I'm saying. You're getting upset. It doesn't translate over. I can be very straightforward in my emails because it's part of ADHD, but it's also just part of who I am. It's not because I'm emotionless, but it comes across that way. So I have to, if I can have a conversation, then it's a whole different thing. So, that's honestly, and sometimes it's like if somebody cares so much about it more than I do, if I don't think it's going to destroy the story, I just kind of give in and let them take the lead so we can get the story done. Yeah, exactly. This one deserves, fine. Because
I want my comma the next time around.
yeah, right. So it's because it's not worth having that argument. You know, even as an editor, I have to deal with that, editing different people. Certain people, I mean, you get some of the funny part is some of the people who respond the worst to edits can be the newbies rather than the bigger, more experienced pros. On the other hand, Mike Resnick would never accept a comma change from me. So it all depends. And so in that end, I'm just like, okay, fine, it's not that big a deal, it's a comma, just keep it. You know, you just have to learn to what really matters. There are changes that I insist on because I'm working with Disney on a Predator, and Disney says this has to change. And there are changes that I insist on because I genuinely think it's better. And then there's changes that it's like, okay, it could go either way. Nobody else will notice but us.
Darn
And you
those
have to
IP
know what that
holders,
is.
huh?
Yeah, exactly.
All right, well, we wanted to have about, oh, sorry.
Disney and Predator just seems like the weirdest combination.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, and you know what? I want to say this because I didn't mean to throw Mike Resnick under the bus. He's a great guy. He was a mentor to me, and I love him. I'm just using him as an example. But you know, I mean, Mike's a great guy, but that was just one thing he was really picky about. You know, and everybody has those.
Well, we do have a little bit of time for questions.
Yes.
So come on up to the mic if you don't mind. And you can say, you know, this question's for Jonathan or for Kevin or for.
Oh, no, well,
Bryan.
the question's for everyone,
Okay.
you know, but early in the seminar, Kevin, you were talking about how Anne McCaffrey would have more of the master Padawan dynamic. And I'm just curious, because that's my experience as well, and I'm considering continuing that. In all of y'all's experience, do you believe there's any, you know, perhaps pitfalls or traps in that unless you're doing maybe something on your own, you might have a hard time establishing your own brand, your own voice, and you'll always kind of stay in that Padawan role regardless of how your craft improves because you're doing so much collaboration work.
Actually, that's one of the things I talk about with folks that I collaborate with is if they are likely to be known because of our collaboration, because their career isn't, you know, at that level yet, I really heavily encourage them to do a lot of their own stuff, a lot more short stories especially, to get their own unique voice out there, you know, to be seen as themselves. I hate it when somebody is in collaboration and is buried in the collaboration. That's unfair, and it also cheats both the junior partner and cheats the reading audience of that other unique voice. So one of the things that if you're a senior in any collaboration, you should be encouraging the others to get out there and write under their own name.
I did.
And also to support that when it's out. When somebody puts it out, you as a senior should be supporting it.
I co-edited a lot of anthologies, and I recently edited an anthology with a guy who's undoubtedly a legend. He was sick most of the time. I ended up doing a lot of the work. But when the book comes out, people say, oh, well, it's good because so-and-so did it. It doesn't matter that I've got all these other anthologies. Doesn't matter the Hugo nomination. Doesn't matter I've got best-selling anthologies with my solo name. So yeah, it's an issue. That's why, you know, you have to establish your brand. You have to be careful. You have to do stuff alone. I also, you know, if somebody comes up and I'm a bigger name in anthologies, I will insist on top billing. I don't want people to think that I am always second fiddle. So, I mean, it's just something you have to deal with.
Well, and specifically to your question, one of the Padawans for Anne McCaffrey was Jodi Lynn Nye, and she's not done too badly for herself after working with Anne McCaffrey. But just as an example, and I've done this many times, I'm in a position where people invite me to contribute stories to anthologies all the time, and Jonathan too. And there are times where I want to do it, but I don't have the time. So either I'll turn it down, or I will go to one of my mini Padawan writers that I've been mentoring and stuff. I go, hey, I've got this, we didn't do it the Predator one, but we got a Predator story. I got invited to it. I really want to do it. I got an idea. You want to work together so that basically the Padawan will do the work, will write the whole story, and then I will do the polish on it, and then it goes in. And I do that to help train them, and it's often a big boost for their career. They get their name in a professional anthology. What I have found realistically, though, is I'm kind of too much of a perfectionist myself for my own writing. And I go, well, that's easy, that they'll do all the work and I'll just give it a quick read and turn it in. And the quick read and my tweaking things usually turns out to be as much work as if I had just written the story in the first place, so.
Okay,
And not that
next.
they're bad writers, but it's just, I have it in my head, this is how a sentence should go, so,
He's just anal, that's all.
yeah. Yes.
Next question?
Hi, I co-write full-time, and one of the struggles we have, I have multiple co-writers, is software where we can both be writing at the same time. So right now I can write from 8 to this time, because the rest of the time, that's when my co-writer is in there, and we have to block everything off. Do you know any software where we can both be in at the same time and it doesn't jump around? Because we've paid for so much software.
Well, that sounds horrible.
It's absolutely horrible. So then we book time.
At the same time, so you can both write at the same time?
Well, we would
Well,
like.
like a
Well,
Google
have you
Docs
tried
is like
Google
writing.
Docs?
Google
Because,
Docs is made of evil.
oh, okay.
Yeah.
What
And
is-
we've tried Dabble, but Dabble jumps.
Can you do Word, Word for the web? Can you do that one?
I don't know. That
Office
one we have not tried.
365 is one, yeah. you
That
can
one
collect-
Yeah,
does not work.
Word for the
When
web.
you're internationally, it kind of does this.
Oh, international.
Scrivener, we have tried.
It might just be easy, if you're done your time, just to email the document to somebody, you know.
When you're
But then your
juggling
version
4 or
controls
5
get all
people, that's
messed
a
up.
lot of.
I would try Word
plus.
for the web,
Word for the
seriously.
webs, okay.
If Google Docs didn't work out, because Word for the web, it looks a lot like it, and you can actually track each other really well.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, uh-huh.
As an indie author who's not going through a traditional publisher, do you have any advice on the financial splitting part? I imagine the first year or so it could be easy just to figure it out and one person pays the other, but in year 5, 10, 15, how do you figure out who gets paid royalties?
You gotta decide up front how that's gonna work.
Yeah, that's
You
gotta be
really
in
do.
contract before you start.
That's-
Right, but do you have advice on the logistics of, does someone handle it and then get the money, or is there like third-party
Oh,
software?
okay, you mean like,
or-
does somebody receive it and then split it up?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, like
Okay, so
from-
when I edit an anthology with somebody, and I'm the quote senior editor, however you want to call the term, it doesn't really matter. I often handle the finances. And when Jonathan does it, we usually run it through Jonathan's. And so Jonathan will pay everybody, including me, and he handles all that and distributing it. When I did it with Larry Correa, Larry handled it and he does all the distributing. And it was that simple. So, I mean, somebody's gonna have to be the one that gets the check if you don't have an agent. If you have an agent, your agent will usually handle that for you.
Actually, I have some experience from an indie point of view working as a collaborator with 3 other authors. So we knew that we were going to keep creating and keep creating. It wasn't going to be just one book or one anthology. So we set up an account. The IP name, set up an account, a business account that way, and we treated it just like its own little miniature publishing house. We had a contract. We all got whatever percent and things like that, and we set it up as like just a small business that way going forward. That way there was never any argument. You know what I mean? All the money came into an account that we all had access to. So that is my suggestion, is look at it that way and set it up just like that above the board and make it an agreement before you get started writing.
Well,
Yeah.
there's since you're indie people, Draft to Digital has the collaboration set up that if you put it through Draft to Digital, they will just issue the payments directly to the different people and nobody touches it. So that helps. But as someone and I am still married, but my wife does the accounting. And when I did my 3 Star Wars anthologies back in 1995, which have still sold and they keep selling, every 6 months, Rebecca I get the check from Bantam Books, and she has to divide up 29 different checks for 29 different authors every 6 months, and it's been 25 years. And she's still getting them, but now the big check is like $180, which I keep half as the editor, and the other $90 gets split among 30 different people. And it is, I think, pain in the ass is the technical term.
I imagine
And-
Rebecca thinks so too.
Yes.
Okay, well, we have 10 seconds left, and we have to be out of this room so they can clean it, reset it for lunch. So thank you guys so much for coming to our panel. This was a lot of fun.